Hey, Bobby Trades! I wanted to do a pretty routine video analysis update of just some, unusual stock options volume I've seen, and the way that I interpret unusual stock options volume really has a lot to do with, what isn't unusual. Okay, well, if a stock has a big move that day, like a very large move, and or a big news breaks that day, and it has a big move, and the market reacts to it, and it has unusual, statistically unusual options volume, then to me that's not very unusual. It had a big move, the options market reacted to it. Now, when the stock didn't have a big move and there wasn't really some dramatic story about it, and it has pretty unusual options activity, that's something that I take advantage, I take note of. Especially when the activity is lining up with a wave count. And so I found about 6 or 7 of those. Going through these screens, what I like to do, it's easier just to show. I This is the unusual options volume screen, and then pretty quick thing right off the bat to do is I sort with the most bull bias to the call side, and then what I can also do is I can go refresh this page. I would say this is probably my favorite screen with the strangle screen. Is refreshing this after I've applied that filter. And then what I do is I sort this list then by the most unusual options volume that's occurred. So this is my favorite list right here, probably my favorite screen with the strangle screen, and I do this exact same thing with this ETFs tab too. I think that's very helpful as well. But with the ETFs, I also like to remember that it's very likely ETFs, they're using them to hedge the assets within them. So anyway, with the stocks, underlying on this page, the general idea is that there's short borrowing fees, right? So even if there was a long, typically if someone's going to take a long gamma position, an institutional investor is going to do it properly. Normally, I think they're going to buy puts and they're going to pair them with shares. And that's just generally how it's done, because the shares, there's a potential to collect dividends, okay? So with calls, a long gamma position, using calls and then shorting the underlying stock is certainly a possible thing to do. The only problem with that is that there's short borrowing fees, right? And so if an institution is going to do this at scale, there are certain times where when I just look at the options chain and I look at the wave count, and 2 and 2 plus 2 doesn't equal fish, it equals 4. So the first one, and also with some of these, the last thing I'll say is that I'll get into a presenter mode. The last thing I'll say is that, I thought some of these stocks have pretty, if they do have big moves, especially the ETFs, it's pretty clear that this is going to be somehow affecting our lives. And one of them in particular, Smith & Wesson brands, prompted me to make this video. And, I'll try to end the monologue, but we've had a lot of this. What people call programming has gotten a lot more blatant, especially with this Alex Garland movie about the Civil War. And then apparently they've even updated, they've updated, they've given us an extra trailer from this. And that trailer happens to mention, what leads to the Civil War starting, which that movie comes out, I think late April, early May. They released another trailer for that movie that says what, causes, or leads to the Civil War. Starts off with false. Anyway, I can't even say some of this, but it's in the same city as the Super Bowl. It's just kind of weird. Anyway, and what's the other one? Disease X. I mean, like I've said, I try not to, you see some of this. This is $5.1 million bought on Amylyx Pharmaceuticals, right? So let's read about this. Is the 6/21/24 call. So what happened with Amylyx Pharmaceuticals? What's this company do? Well, I found it. Let's see. It has 761% unusual options volume. So that's statistically telling us that this is not a coincidence. A lot of people don't know anything about statistics, and so they just call everything a coincidence when it's not. Okay, if you don't know what a coincidence is, then you don't understand sampling science. You don't understand, process improvement. You really don't understand how. You definitely don't understand how you're getting to and from, work or cities. And, I'm not going to pretend I understand some of that, but, I do have a background in statistics. And when everyone calls something a coincidence, especially some of my uncanny predictions that I say, like, hey, this is what's happening in the options market. This is what's happening with the wave count. This is what's going to happen with a 500 million market cap move, or a 500 billion market cap move in the case of some of these stocks, these large caps. And people are, oh, that's coincidence. Everyone knew about, AI when Nvidia was at 175. And anyway, some of these, they're going to affect our lives. And I've talked about so many pharmaceuticals. Amylyx Pharmaceuticals, you were the one of the day. Opco Health, I've talked about recently. Co-Diagnostics, Moderna, Novavax. This is the whole healthcare sector. Really was very quiet. Did not participate in this rally, especially biotechs. Not much at all in 2023. Amylyx Pharmaceuticals is a clinical stage for another clinical stage pharmaceutical company. It focuses on developing a novel therapeutic or anthropic lateral sclerosis and other neurodegenerative diseases. Amylyx Pharmaceuticals is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Let's try that one more time. Amylyx Pharma is a clinical stage pharmaceutical company focusing on developing a novel therapeutic for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and other neurodegenerative diseases, and it's based in Cambridge, Mass. All right, so very unprofitable company. At least this one has sales. Opco, didn't have any sales. Anyway, it's just very clear in the options market. It's the Chiefs and the 49ers, the Chinese New Year. And now, they've had people, Joe Buck just blatantly said there's going to be some crazy event in Vegas. Rolling Stone posted a picture, a video of Taylor Swift talking about some crazy event in Vegas, just a random video of Taylor Swift. And then it says, tomorrow something's crazy is going to happen. I don't know, man. And then also I'll give one more for the wackos out there. I have a video about Iowa football, and this weird ritual with the Gaza hospital and all this stuff, just randomly on the very, just randomly. It's not anywhere near college football season now. The House Judiciary Committee yesterday, in talking about this conflict in the Middle East, just randomly post a picture of the Iowa football team making fun of their offense. How funny, right? And I'm just like, okay, the Iowa football team does the hospital wave. They had that huge ritual where they just took away their points in their game, right before, right when Israel started, destroying all those hospitals in Gaza, and they were trying to convince us it was okay. And just, hey, it's, Daddy Israel, they've got like a lot of psyops planned. And I mean, they blatantly said it looks like some of them are going to kick off, this week. We'll talk about some evidence for that, right? Because a lot of people are going to say they made predictions and stuff, disease X, right? Oh, I was talking about disease X. This how many pharmaceutical companies, are they just going to start loading up, right? And these are going to affect geopolitical events, But Amylyx Pharma, right, biotech of the day, 5.1 million dollars in calls bought, out of the money, for June. Like, get out of here. Like, they're, I think that if AMLX, what's this, 17.06 and 11.82, I think if AMLX is above 12.94, then they're playing a wave 3 of wave 3. It's a pretty clean subdivision. And honestly, like, there's nothing wrong with neurodegenerative, diseases, being cured. If you heard me try to pronounce neurodegenerative diseases, you'll probably, think we'll definitely need to cure some. But, all these events, like, they don't just tell you about them in the media, they profit from them too. I mean, you can see like what they're buying on a public option chain. And one of their big things is that, like, oh, they tell us about it. They tell us about it. Well, this is one of the ways they tell us about it. Like, they're like, dude, it's a public options chain. I've even seen them, if you go study the Greeks on some of these, you'll see them put 72, 144 and 153 all up in the Greeks for their calculations. I have a post about that recently. Goler, 144, 72, and 153 all just happened to be the Greeks of that big trade they bought on yet another oil stock. And so how many of these, it's not a coincidence when they're buying 700 to 800%, every day. And I think that this is their excuse, is that it's available. It's available, and so, if it's above 12.94, like, this isn't the same degree count as this. If it's above 12.94, I'll make it blue to match, right? When we're hearing about Disease X, Opco Health, and Moderna, and, or maybe it won't be Disease X. Maybe they'll just announce, like, all this, bad stuff that's happened. Let's look at this one. Really, Friday. I think they bought this on Friday. Let's see. Today. This is a $444,000 out-of-the-money strangle on Smith & Wesson brands. Wow. Smith & Wesson brands. Interesting. The Friday, on Friday, they could be doing this. It had let's see. No, this isn't a coincidence. It's not a coincidence when someone can statistically see, looking at SBSW, this is on the refresh screen. So the refresh screen is going to have an almost entire bull bias. The unrefresh screen will not. So I'll just go back to the regular one. But the unrefresh screen is going to have the highest option volume readings. So going to Smith & Wesson brands, it's not statistical. Again, a 700%, unusual options volume on SBSW. It looks like it's 26% bias to the call side. A $444,000 out of the money strangle for September. And neither of these companies that I've gone over report earnings until mid-March. Interesting, And I've talked about this, like, what you think they're just going to have Smith & Wesson brands go up and, they're just going to say it was because, maybe they will say it's Disease X, right? Am I even allowed to say Disease X on YouTube? Anyway, maybe they'll say that's what they said for the outdoor movement, right? But look at this. I'm long POWW. We're all probably going to be POWWs, and they probably know about this, 10.38. This is the long-term invalidation. Even the short-term invalidation, 11.96, that's a little tight. I think the longer-term swing is 10.38 above this. I mean, I think they're playing strangles, getting this last bit of accumulation for Smith & Wesson brands. And, not that it matters to the broker, but I don't think that they're just going to tell us that Smith & Wesson brands and, all these biotechs are ripping to the moon, and it's because their CEO has really been hard at work. I hope that's the case. I really do. Let's see, how is Cinemark? I've talked about one of the other movie theaters. I want to talk about Cinemark now. Cinemark, 1,000% unusual options volume. This isn't the call bias. This is the percentage. 87% of the entire volume was call bias. 1,000% unusual options volume. 87% of the entire volume was calls. I don't think any of these stocks, I guess, that one neurodegenerative one had a 4% move for a biotech. That's not crazy at all. I mean, even just looking at those options that were pretty far out of the money, were still $580, even though they expire in 4 or 5 months. That's reflecting that the options market is pricing in that biotechs are going to have big moves, but it's still having the unusual options volume. I think that for Cinemark, it's got a little bit of a setup here from a wave perspective. I don't think that from a fundamental perspective, I'm very interested in it at all. But just kind of knowing Cinemark's a movie theater, I've talked about Meme Madness. They bought Strangles on, GME. I mean, they're ripping some of these. I don't even know if I can talk about them. For all we know. I mean, who knows? They'll say some, I just want everyone to see, like, when all the pharmaceuticals rip, or all the biotechs. We'll talk about corn. Corn and silver. They bought crazy options on corn and silver, but corn today, it's like, it's not a coincidence when there's a 3 or 4 month options accumulation campaign. And I really think that, like, that this is what they've been waiting on, is just for, like, someone to be like, yep, like, no, like, and they know, like, I've always known deep down, like, America just has this weird thing. We listen to people who have money. If someone's got money, like, we'll just, like, all right, like, why are we interviewing this random billionaire about geopolitics? It's like, well, because he's rich, and if we want to be like him, then we need the same opinions that he has about Syria. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem like very good logic. He's works for a doll company. But anyway, 1985, man, they're quoting Bruce Springsteen and Madonna. I'm just kidding. That was complete nonsense. That was funny. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't even joke about that. People get so butthurt. If I talk about numerology, gematria, any of that for 5 seconds, people whine, they protest unfollow, they protest unlike, and I don't care. I just think, I'm not interested in Cinemark. I just think from a movie theater perspective, it's interesting. Let's get these fibs perfect. 12.28, 12.28 to 1985. 12.70 is pretty tight. And I say that because Cinemark has a high beta. But I do think, that's just going to be a fun one if another movie theater gets going to bring up again. Perrigo. So this is mostly a pharmaceutical preparations company, but it's also got something interesting. Baby formula and infant formula is another big part of this company's product line. This is another one, where it does pay a little bit of a dividend, like Smith & Wesson brands. Perrigo is a diversified revenue stream selling infant formula. You're right. So if infant formula is ripping again, and they've got infant formula locked up at Walmart, like it's diamonds and gold, like there's probably going to be stuff affecting our lives. So this has, other pharmaceutical aspects, but it's a big infant formula place. Like all these big stores, all the big stores that sell infant formula, where they had that locked up, if that happens again, something tells me, this is a long-term cycle. And I actually do think the best invalidation is 26.81. Let's look at the justification for talking about this stock at all. Unusual options volume. PRGO right up there, 1,239% unusual options volume. Wow. So that's statistically not a coincidence. 92% of the volume was calls, right? So infant formula, biotechs, another pharmaceutical, and now they just wanted to Damn, they didn't get fancy at all. They just wanted to exercise some options next week, I guess. Yeah, it looks like they just want to exercise these next week. So what's the idea here? Well, if Perigo does close above 30, this investor is going to presumably exercise 10,000 of those calls. 10,000 times 200. That's over $200,000 just for this leg. And how many shares is this holding? I'll just get out this. So what could be going on here? What could be going on here? Well, these calls have a delta of 82. That means in delta dollars, this is the equivalent of controlling 827,790 shares. So if this MM does want these exercised, they are doing it because they want to control 827,000 shares over more than that. And they spent just for this leg, how much did they exactly spend? 210 times 10,095. That is not $200,000. That is $2 million. $2,119,950 was spent on PRGO in the money calls, presumably to control 827,790 shares at the time of expiration for this MM, and that was 1,200% unusual options volume. So no, if this stock is entering a cyclical bull, if this stock is entering a cyclical bull, and all these, all these stores are locking up their infant formula because it's, worth its weight in gold. That's not a coincidence that there was a big options accumulation campaign, by these MMs, and, this idea that it's a free market. What will you hear? What will you hear when some of these stocks rally? You'll hear these ridiculous financial institutions completely prostitute themselves. They'll completely prostitute themselves. And they'll say that retail is FOMOing and, investors are skittish. They'll just use all these stupid adjectives. It's like no retailer is spending $2 million on in-the-money calls to exercise, at the time of expiration. Like, this doesn't happen. No one's spending $5 million on out-of-the-money calls on neurodegenerative companies. Like, that's... and so when that rallies and they say it's disease X, or they say it's because of some pre-programmed FF in Vegas that Joe Buck knows about, or apparently, and everyone thinks they know it's coming. They just don't know what exactly it's going to look like. They've decided pharmaceutical preparations, and another sector they've been buying. I don't have them, I don't have the picture for this yesterday. Yeah, above 26.81. Infant formula, not a coincidence. PRGO, I don't believe it's a coincidence. It also has a pharmaceutical side. This had, I don't have the exact details, unfortunately, but this has been a theme that I've seen on this ETF screen as, the transition into that side of the video occurs. Actually, well, I probably should have marked that up before that. But yeah, I wanted you guys to see the process. DVY, just kind of this idea of a rotation into value, or, DGRO, SCHD, not those are a little more growth oriented. But I've made this joke about how some boomer MM is buying. And I've talked about this ETF, so maybe just to save time, I'll switch to this one. But this ETF, I've talked about how, someone at least is playing a dividend, rotation trade, a dividend value trade. This idea that, you know, a lot of the large cap equities are up here. A lot of the value in you know, the energies, the bonds, the industrials, even some of them, the financials, the healthcare, still acting or not really responding to, where the rate cuts rally or whatever they're calling it. And this idea that we could rotate into some more, value, at least, in this post when I talked about div, it was some guy spent like 25 grand. That's not anything. I think what I saw yesterday wasn't that. But this has just been a theme that I've seen, is that, Wyckoff always said, act like the market's, controlled by one guy, like one investor. It seems like this one investor thinks an ETF like DVY is going to quietly, who knows, right? The good companies in this stock, in this ETF, in my opinion, my unprofessional opinion. But yesterday I saw DVY have some interesting activity. Don't have the exact details for it, but I'll get into some other dividend ETFs, or not necessarily dividend ETFs, but more of this value kind of, asset-backed idea, later. I also saw SLVP. I don't want to take pictures of every single unusual options ETF I see, but DVY and SLVP, I saw yesterday just anecdotally, kind of this similar theme, that maybe, it might be especially with the quad witching around the corner, we tend to have periods where just seasonally, I don't know, this idea that people forget about the value stocks, and, then in the winter, during the March quad witching correction, or even the sell in May and go away correction, we remember these value stocks. It looks like the MMs are remembering, an ETF like DVY that I would not think is, too high on the retail priority right now, 102.66. And 120.06. $102.66 and 120.06. Need some of those neurodegenerative diseases or, cures or whatever. 120.06 and 102.66. It's probably because everyone's watching TikTok. Anyway, corn, right? Corn, this corn ETF. The money from a dollar perspective is going to be a little smaller usually on the unusual options volumes ETF, but I like to analyze the less liquid the less liquid ETFs that they choose. Yesterday, for example, just to go on a little offshoot, yesterday I saw the Koro, KORO. That's an ETF that does leverage, triple leverage on this South Korean ETF. I'm not sure if it's this South Korean ETF specifically, but it does a triple leverage, tracks triple leverage the returns on the South Korean market. And so I saw unusual options volume on that. That's a much less liquid ETF. So there's more of a consequence to, in investing in an ETF and options on an ETF like that is specifically, and so then the idea that short borrowing fees and, stuff like that would be used for a long gamma position, it doesn't really make sense. So sometimes I like to analyze less liquid ETF options volume. Was a long way of saying that. South Korea, 57.03. would be the little tighter invalidation. 54.49 would be the wider, but much more meaningful long-term invalidation. And it's not really just, this boomer rotation that I see the MMs prepping for. It's also, this foreign market idea. So I think Asia is going to be one of them, EWY and South Korea. I think I've seen a theme there. Anyway, corn had 207% unusual options volume, 96%, calls. So it's not going to be a crazy amount of money, but I do think that, this is kind of, with these less liquid ETFs, it can also help see when the MMs at least are betting on the time. So I don't want to glorify gambling. It looks like a lot of this options volume was, what I would consider a gamble. 140, 11, calls. They expire in May. I mean, if this person's right, they could presumably make a lot of money, but this looks more like a smaller minnow gambling. I have a little bit of a conspiracy that sometimes they'll just throw out really odd trades just to get an ETF on the radar for one of their buddies. But it doesn't look like this was anything, to make an unusual options volume video about for corn. But I do think that, maybe this small minnow gambler will get lucky, Nice little count, I think. 18.60 is going to invalidate. I've posted about corn. I think I've also posted about another unusual options, sighting on corn recently. That's probably why I have this so marked up, all pretty. But yeah, I think if, corn starts a big ripping rally, and, some of these oil stocks, the other one that was seen was UGA. I think statistically, they're not coincidences. Let's see, UGA, unusual options volume. And maybe we'll just see one that I didn't look at. I didn't look at this ETF screen that long. But UGA, this has been a theme that like some of these oil stocks and some of these gas stocks have been, appearing on this screen. Yeah. So we'll look at UGA and then we'll wrap it up. Let's see. This is tracking an exchange traded security that is designed to track the percentage terms, the movement of gasoline prices. So volatility and Greeks. Let's look at here. Whoa, see? Isn't this kind of interesting? Isn't this kind of interesting? That they've just bet a lot of money, an unusual lot of money. Let's see, how unusual was it? UGA, 525% unusual options volume. Not a coincidence. And it had a 47% call bias. So statistically, not a coincidence. 500 times 420. I'm just kidding. But yeah, 500 times 420. That's a $210,000 leg that it looks like they just want that to be, exercised to control a good amount of shares on that expiration date, And the other leg was 260, 500 at 260. Wow. Do you guys think this was retail? Retail spent $340,000 on in the money and at the money calls on UGA, that expire in a month, and so when UGA, if UGA is ripping and running, into, or, whatever, maybe it's a long game of position, and my Elliott Wave interpretation is incorrect, the media will come out and start talking about, that there's some retailer, that retail is, getting greedy, investors are getting skittish, they're reading this crap, and it's just like they know that's not true, right? No retailer is just casually dropping millions of dollars on, these very specific, obscure trades. Specifically, even, to think about, the retail is not interested in. These are specifically the ones that I go over, the ones that have very little interest at all. So maybe this is, maybe I'm incorrect. Maybe UGA will go below 56.91, which is a, wide but meaningful invalidation for this nest. But, a lot of people think that, oil's just too bullish. Oil's just, this is a theme. The biotech of the day, the energy of the day, the boomer ETF of the day. I'm not betting against, many people have been made foolish betting against the alpha and outperformance of tech. And I believe that, in the world of, all these amazing ETFs that are selling option premium and, getting, access to the upside too within the ETFs, that, it's not really I'm not too interested in the big tech short, calling the super top and, proclaiming that Microsoft will never go $1 above 430. But, I think that this kind of idea that things get a little hectic going into the March quad witching, especially after a euphorically bullish 18-month VIX crash. I don't know, right? It looks like they've kind of picked their horses for the next rotation, right? I talked about, a lot of these, and for all these sectors, it's not like I've, the first time I've talked about pharma, but Goler, man. Goler. A lot of these transport the oil too. Transporting the oil.